you know, you want to share the screen with me, right? You want to see the Midrashim that I'm reading? Okay, so
Yes.
I'm going to share the screen with these Midrashim, and I'll ask people to read. So when I ask you to read, just unmute yourself. So I'm just going to say mute all now, and everyone will be muted. And then when I call on you, just unmute yourself, or I'll unmute you. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
That way there won't be any real noise in the background. Okay, everybody is now muted. Okay, great. Okay, you can hear me, but I can't hear you. Great. That's how I like it.
Carl, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, I was just wondering, what are we reading?
Okay, I'm going to share my screen so that you
Okay.
can see exactly what I see, and you'll have it right in front of you. So here goes. Okay. Okay, can you all see what I'm seeing? Rabbi Meir? Good? Okay.
Yes, it's good.
Great, great. Gaby, can you read this first Midrash? Let me see how I can do this. I want to unmute you. Whoops. Okay, I'm going to get there. Let's see.
I think Gaby could unmute herself, Rabbi.
Oh, Gaby, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I just did. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I have a problem with my vision, so this.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Bruce, why don't you go and read the first Midrash?
You said Bruce, Rob?
I'm sorry. Start with whoops. Yep. I want number one. Where okay. Let's see.
Yeah, go back.
Let me get it.
Yeah, scroll up. There you go.
I'm scrolling up. Ah, there we go.
Okay.
Can you see it, Bruce?
Yes.
Okay. Good, great. Why don't you read it, Bruce, and then we'll talk about it. So let me just mention that this is based on two passages, two biblical passages. One has to do with this particular midrash comes from the book of Leviticus, and it has to do with what's called Zevach Shlamim, which is the peace offerings. But if you look at that word very literally, it really is literally, it's really peace sacrifices. In other words, Zevach is a sacrifice. Shalom is peace. Zevach Shlamom is a peace offering, but it's really a sacrifice that you make for peace. And it's also based on a selection from Numbers, from the book of Numbers, that has to do with bitter waters. If you know this, just to make you familiar with the bitter waters, if a man suspected his wife of being unfaithful, he could accuse her of being unfaithful, and in such a case, the two of them were brought to the priest, to the temple, and she was made to drink bitter waters. What are bitter waters? Bitter waters are water with God's name. You would take a piece of parchment with God's name and grind it up and dissolve it in the water, and she would drink that water. And the rule is that if nothing happens to her, she is innocent. But if these horrible things happen to her, like her belly swells up and her face turns green and she starts puking and all sorts of terrible things happen to her, then she's guilty of infidelity. So it was a test of a woman to see if she was sleeping around, if she was not being faithful to her husband. And
Was there a comparable test for a man?
No.
No, that's a surprise.
But those are the two biblical verses, the two biblical sections that you have to be aware of. One is Zevach Shlamim, which is the peace offerings, and one is the bitter waters that a woman was made to swallow. Okay, Bruce, now you can go ahead.
Okay. Rabbi Ishmael taught, great is peace, for even of the great name, written though it be in sanctity, did the Holy One, blessed be he, say that it may be blotted out in water for the purpose of making peace between husband and wife. Rabbi Meir used to deliver discourses on Sabbath evenings. There was a woman there in the habit of listening to him. Once the discourse lasted a long time, and she waited until the exposition was concluded. She went home and found that the candle had gone out. Her husband asked her, "Where have you been?" She answered, "I was sitting listening to the voice of the preacher." Said he to her, "I swear I will not let you enter here until you go and spit in the face of the preacher." She stayed away 1 week, a second, and a third. Said her neighbors to her, "Are you still angry one with the other? Let us come with you to the discourse." As soon as Rabbi Meir saw them, he saw by means of the Holy Spirit what had happened and said, "Is there a woman among you clever at whispering a charm over an eye?" The woman's neighbors said to her, "If you go and spit in his eye, you will release your husband from his vow. When she sat down before him, she became afraid of him and said to him, "Rabbi, I am not expert at whispering an invocation over an eye." Said he to her, "For all that, spit in my face 7 times, and I will be cured." She did so, and he said to her, "Go tell your husband, you told me to do it once, and I spat 7 times. Said his disciples to him, "Should people thus abuse the Torah? Could you not have told one of us to whisper an invocation for you?" Said he to them, "It is not good enough for Rabbi Meir."
Wait a minute, read that again.
I'm sorry.
Is
Is it not good enough for Rabbi Meir to be like unto his creator? For Rabbi Ishmael has taught, great is peace, since even of the great name, written though it be in sanctity, the Holy One, blessed be he, has said, let it be blotted out in water for the purpose of making peace between husband and wife.
Okay, so that's an interesting midrash, and you know the basis of the midrash. So first of all, we hear that she went to synagogues on Friday night. She went to synagogues on Friday night. Somewhat unusual for a woman. Usually the man would go on Friday night, and the woman would be home making dinner. But she went on Friday night. And she particularly went because she enjoyed hearing Rabbi Meir giving his Friday night talks. That's sort of unusual in itself, but he had a little study session after the service on Friday night. He had a study session, and she particularly liked listening to him. And this particular Friday night, it went on for quite a while. And she didn't want to be rude and leave before it was over. So she went home and found that the candle had gone out. Now, that can be very literal, talking about what? The Shabbos the Shabbos candle that was lit. So apparently he must have lit the Shabbos candle, the husband lit the Shabbos candle so that she could go to the synagogue because that's what she liked. But she was there for such a long time that the candle, it went out by the time she came home. But there's also a phrase in Aramaic or Hebrew that uses this same symbol as a sort of a metaphor. The candle had gone out. Does anyone know? There's a special mitzvah. It's considered to be a double mitzvah on Friday night, on Shabbos. Carla?
Make love.
Right. To have sex preferably with your wife and your husband on Saturday night is considered a double mitzvah. So that when it says the candle had gone out, that could mean literally the candle went out or his desire went out. It was extinguished. It was over. He was no longer sexually interested in her by the time that she got home. So then, with that in mind, she says, I was sitting listening to the voice of the preacher. And he says, a very formal saying. He says, I swear, which is an oath. That's a formal oath that he's taking. You can't enter here until you spit in the face of the preacher. So why would he say such a thing? I mean, that's a pretty severe thing to say to your wife on Friday night when it's, God knows, I don't know, 10 o'clock at night. You can't come into this house until you've spit in the house of the preacher. Why would he say such a thing? Any thoughts about that? Just unmute yourself and pipe in.
Maybe he didn't believe her. Maybe he thought she was having an affair.
Okay, so maybe there was some background to this, and he suspected that she was having she had some attraction to this particular Rabbi Meir, that she really liked him very much. Enough to, I mean, he put up with it, let's say, all these weeks he put up with it, that she was going and listening to him until this one time when she simply didn't come home until it was late at night. And then it was, he couldn't put up with it anymore. And he suspected her. Or the other possibility is he could just be, a hothead. He could just be someone who resented the fact that he didn't get to eat Shabbos dinner, which she obviously prepared for him, and didn't get to have sex with her and everything else. And he was just an angry person, depending if you look at it from her point of view, I guess, or from his point of view. Was he just an angry, sort of disgruntled, hot-headed person? Or was he reflecting weeks of sort of pent-up anger about her fascination with this preacher, Rabbi Meir? We don't know that. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yes.
another way of looking at it is he might have suspected that she was unfaithful, not necessarily with Rabbi Meir, and he kind of called her bluff because he never imagined she would really go and spit in the eyes of the rabbi. He might have been so upset that he didn't want her to come back.
It's possible, Henny, but the two reasons that I have trouble with that interpretation is because I think it's too verifiable. I mean, it would be too easy for him to simply ask anyone in the synagogue if she was there or not. I mean, that would be, a no-brainer. He could just say, was she there? Wasn't she there? So for her to come up with a story like I was listening to Rabbi Meir and it be a lie that she wasn't, I think in this particular case, I think it would be very difficult. And I think the assumption in this Midrash is that she's a very pious person. She's not the type of person who would do such that kind of a thing. Maybe with Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir, I don't know, but certainly, I don't think she would make such an excuse if she knew that he could ask anybody in the synagogue, was she there or wasn't she there? That would be too easy to call out. So I don't think, but okay, I accept it as a possibility, but I think not a real possibility in this case. I think he was jealous of Rabbi Meir. One way or another, he was jealous of Rabbi Meir. Okay, so he makes this oath. Now, he can't be freed from this oath. This is a formal oath, unless she actually does what he says, or not. So she stays out for a couple of weeks, 3-4 weeks, and she's probably staying with a friend, and they say it's enough already. Let's go ask Rabbi Meir what his advice is. So they go to the synagogue, and it says, as soon as Rabbi Meir saw them, he saw by means of the Holy Spirit what had happened. Okay, he saw by Ruach HaKodesh. He knew. God informed him. What is Ruach HaKodesh? Ruach HaKodesh, Rabbi Meir was a spiritual man, and somehow he was able to discern exactly what the situation was. Or if you want to be a little less mystical, you might say he heard the gossip. I mean, if she's now staying with friends for weeks and weeks, I'm sure it would get back to Rabbi Meir. Somebody would say, what's going on? This woman is staying for weeks with us and with so-and-so and can't go home to her house. So Rabbi Meir either heard by Ruach HaKodesh or by Ruach HaGossip. One or the others, he however you want to interpret it, he knew exactly what had happened. Rabbi Meir was no dope, and he had his ear to the ground, and probably people were speaking and saying about what had happened. So he makes this statement: is there a woman clever at whispering a charm over an eye? And her neighbors, of course, see that as an opportunity and say, go do it, and you release your husband from his vow. So she is pious and honest, and she can't lie. She can't say to Rabbi Meir, who she respected, who she sees him as a revered person in her life, that I am an expert in cures. She couldn't lie to him like that. So she's honest to him, and she says, I don't know. Anyway, he says, spit 7 times. Why 7 times? I don't know. It's a good biblical number. Go tell your husband I spit 7 times. Now, his disciples said, should people thus abuse the Torah? What did they mean by that? What do they mean? Yeah.
It's referring to that first phrase, which says, you can blot things, you can blot out the name of God in order to settle a dispute, right? In order to make peace between husband and wife. And this is sort of a play on that, as a way you're going to spit in the rabbi's face is not exactly that.
Okay, so Torah now is rabbi. Rabbi equals Torah. Rabbi Meir equals Torah. If you spit in Rabbi Meir's face, since Rabbi Meir is the scholar, the eminent scholar, he's Torah. So if you spit in his face, right, you've abused Torah. But when we hear them saying that, we also, and they say, could you not have told one of us to whisper an invocation? We learned that his disciples had no idea what was going on. They didn't know this whole backstory. All they knew was what was out there in the public. They knew that Rabbi Meir said, "Is there anyone who can cure an eye disease?" And they heard her saying, "I can't." And he said, "Anyway, spit in my eye 7 times." And they saw that as a disgrace to Rabbi Meir, and therefore a disgrace to Torah. It was disgraceful that he would have her spit in his face 7 times. What could be more disgraceful than that? Spit in the face of the rabbi who is the Torah personified. So they didn't know the whole story of this woman and her husband and all the backstory.
But despite the fact that he got spit in the face 7 times, he did a very good mitzvah for getting the 2 of them back together, right?
Of course. So he says to them, he explains it to them. He says, is it not good enough for Rabbi Meir to be like his creator? In other words, that's sort of a general principle that we have. It's a principle of being like God, acting like God. God is compassionate, we can be compassionate. God is forgiving, we should be forgiving. God clothes the naked like he clothed Adam, we should clothe the naked. In other words, imitatio Dei, we should be trying to imitate God, doing like God does. And he said, I'm just doing like God does. What does that mean in this context? In the context of the bitter waters, it means that God was willing to have his name defaced, that it melted, dissolved in water in order to create peace between a man and his wife, between a husband and a wife. Shouldn't I be willing to have my honor be sullied for the sake of making peace between a husband and a wife? Am I greater than God? God himself let his name be written on a piece of parchment, dissolved in water and drunk by this woman, defaced, in order to create peace between a husband and a wife. This is not only a little midrash about making peace between husbands and wife and saying that everything is permitted in order to do that. Any kind of indignity is permitted in order to do that. Lying, debasing yourself, whatever, to make peace between a husband and a wife. But it's also an interesting, to me, as I see it, a very interesting interpretation of the bitter waters. How so? Okay, we know the story as it's told in the Bible about the bitter waters, that if the woman drinks the water with the parchment dissolved in it, her stomach will be bloated and horrible things will happen to her. She'll be deformed and die because of these bitter waters. How does that make peace between a husband and a wife? In what way are the bitter waters a vehicle for making peace between a husband and a wife?
Didn't every wife pass that test? I mean, it's very unlikely that would have happened from drinking a small piece of the Torah. It seems like a test that no wife ever failed.
Good. Very good point. Very good point. So, so the point of that bit, what they're saying is that nobody ever got sick from drinking the bitter waters. And the idea of the bitter waters is to make it have so much gravitas, so much holiness, that it would convince the husband that his wife was faithful to him. Because nothing would happen to her. She would drink it and she'd be just fine, like drinking a glass of water with some gook in it. But he would be so impressed that he would say, okay, there was nothing else that she could do to prove to him that she was faithful other than this. This was the ultimate test of her faith, that she was willing to drink this water and suffer these horrible consequences, and nothing happened. And therefore he could go back and live to her. It was much better than her just saying, I'm innocent, and the court saying, yes, she's innocent, and he would never believe it. But this was God who was saying she was innocent. So what could be more powerful a test than that?
I think it's really progressive of the Torah to do that and put women in such an advantage situation. It's like I keep thinking of the witches and how did they prove that they were innocent? They drowned them, and if they drowned, they're innocent.
Right.
So here it's like the total opposite. They're giving the women all the advantage and the benefit of the doubt, which is really amazingly progressive.
Yes. But the only caveat to that, Ella, is that the woman could say, couldn't she, no, I'm not going to drink that. She could say, I'm not going to do that because of her fear. Do any of you remember a member of Bethel years ago named Jeff Lesser?
Yeah, sure.
Jeff Lesser was a professor at Conn College, and they were members of Bethel for many years. And he wrote, he's now at Emory, but he wrote books about South American Jewry. His wife Eliana was from, I think, Argentina or Brazil. Anyway, he wrote this book, and in the book he has one interesting anecdote, that these Jews came from Eastern Europe. I want to say back in the when there were pogroms in Europe, and probably in the 30s or 20s, they came over to South America to start. They wanted Jews to get out of South America, so they came out of Europe because of the pogroms. So the young men came over to start settlements in South America, and then presumably to bring others over. It never really happened, but these young men who started these farms in South America were in a predicament because they wanted to get married and have families, but there were no Jews, no Jewish women. There were only these Jewish men. And their interaction was with non-Jews in their communities. And they thought, well, if we can only convert these non-Jews to Jews, then we could have wives and families and, be happy. But they had a problem. They couldn't really do the conversions because they had no rabbis. There was no rabbi to supervise the conversion. They could take the woman to the mikveh and everything, but they couldn't really they didn't have the expertise to know whether their conversion was kosher or not. So they came up with this solution. They would, if a man wanted to marry a local woman who was not Jewish, they brought her before this Beit Din, this sort of a court that they set up. And they didn't even know really what questions to ask her because they weren't that knowledgeable in Yiddishkeit, in Judaism. So what they did was they said, look, here's what we're going to do. You see, this is a rock. And they held up a stone, just a regular stone. They said, the last step before you actually get converted is you have to put this stone in your mouth. It's clean, just put the stone in your mouth. If you're really sincere about giving up your old religion and becoming Jewish, nothing will happen. It's just a stone, it'll be in your mouth. But in our tradition, if you are not sincere about your desire to convert to Judaism, to believe in one God, then this stone will become white hot and it will melt right through your tongue and your jaw and fall out. That's what's going to happen if you're not sincere. And they said, here, take it. And some of the women put it in their mouth, and of course, nothing happened. And some of the men ran the hell out of there and never came back. And that was the best that they could do to see whether a person was sincere in their desire to convert. And to me, this is almost an identical situation where the woman is given the choice. You can drink the bitter waters and prove that you're innocent or not. And you have to assume that she believed that if she wasn't innocent, these horrible things would really happen to her. So either she would refuse to drink the water and that would tell the tale, or she would drink the water and nothing would happen. So it's an interesting interpretation of the biblical test of the bitter waters, and also an interesting, I think, exploration of the character of Rabbi Meir, that he was willing to forego all of his, his honor, his dignity, in order to make peace between a husband and wife. And of course, we know that the woman went back to her husband. She probably would have been better off staying away, but she went back and, and they lived happily ever after, so to speak. Okay, so let's look at the next one. Let's see, I'm looking there. Henny, do you want to read this one? Israel said to Joseph.
Some of it is being obscured by the images of the people. How do I
you can
change
just move
that?
the images to the top of your screen. Just push them up to the top.
Okay, perfect. And Israel said unto Joseph, now let me die, 46:30.
Okay. That's Genesis 46:30. And that was when Jacob, Israel, saw Joseph, right? He had been away from Joseph for so many years. Joseph was sold as a slave to Egypt, and had no contact with his family for years and years until the famine, and then they came down. You know the whole story. They came down to Egypt, and Joseph tested them, the whole business, and then he said, "Bring your father Jacob down to bring my father Jacob down to see me." And when Jacob got out of his wagon and saw Joseph, he said, "Now let me die. I can die now." But they're taking this now very literally. And they're saying that when he saw Joseph, he was so surprised that he could, that it could take his life, because he was so surprised by seeing Joseph. Okay, go ahead.
Hananiah ben Hakanai and Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai went to study Torah under Rabbi Akiva at Bnei Brak, and spent 13 years there. Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai used to send letters home and so knew what was happening there. Hananiah ben Hakanah did not send letters home and did not know what was happening there. His wife sent him a message. Your daughter has attained puberty. Come and arrange for her marriage. Now, Rabbi Akiba learned this through divine inspiration and announced, "Whoever has a daughter of ripe years, let him go and arrange for her marriage." What did he, Hananiah, do? He went to a well where he heard the woman who drew water say, "Oh, daughter of Hakina, fill your pitcher and go up home." She went, and he followed until she entered her house. His wife barely saw him when her soul departed. Some say that it returned.
Okay, it's an interesting little story, Maisa, about these two Torah scholars that went to study with Shimon Bar Yochai, a very famous scholar and Hasidic Kabbalistic leader. Anyway, in Bnei Brak near Tel Aviv, a very religious community. 13 years they spent there. 13 years. That's a long time to be away from your family. One of the two would send letters home, and he knew what was going on. But Hananiah was so absorbed in his studying, 13 years, that he never even sent letters. And he didn't know what was happening. And finally, his wife sent him this message that his daughter attained puberty. Well, he was away from 13 years, so obviously, if his daughter was, let's say, 5 when he left, she would be, well, if she was 4 when he left, she would be 17 or 16, whatever she was. It was time for, in those days, for her to be married. And the obligation of the father is to marry off your child, your daughter, when she obtained puberty. So let's say that happened at 14. Come and arrange for her marriage. Rabbi Akiba, who is their teacher, learned this through divine inspiration. Is there any other way that he might have learned this, if you don't want to believe or trust so much in divine inspiration?
Rechilut.
Well, either rechilut, which is sort of gossip, or, the letters have to come through the academy. So he could look at the letters as they come in. So he could simply have read the letter that came in for Hananiah ben Hakinai, and he knew. But we don't want to accuse Rabbi Akiva opening other people's mail, so we say Ruach HaKodesh. It was holy, by holy inspiration divine inspiration that he knew. Okay, one way or another, he knew. And he didn't want to embarrass Hakinai, so he says something very generic. He says, if it might happen to be that anybody's daughter has attained puberty, is ripe of years, he should go arrange for a marriage. So what did Hananiah do? He went to a well. Why did he go to the well? He goes back to his town after 13 years. Why does he go to the well?
To hear the gossip?
Okay, good, great. The well is like today's world. The well would be the drinking fountain.
Or the water cooler in an office.
It's the water cooler in the office. It's where all the gossip. So obviously he was away for so long that he didn't even know where his family lived anymore. Otherwise he would go to their home. He went to the well. He didn't even know where his family lived. He figured he'd go to the well and listen to whatever gossip is going on at the well, because that's where everybody talks about everything. And he sat there and he listened. And what did he hear? He heard something very interesting. He heard the women who draw the water say, "O daughter of Hakinai, fill your pitcher and go up home." What does he learn from that piece of information. Who is Hakinai?
One of the women at the well.
Grandfather.
No? Who is Hakinai?
Isn't it he? Because
No.
it says up above, Hananiah ben Hakina.
Hananiah ben Hakinai means Hananiah, the son of Hakinai.
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay.
So what? So who is
Hakin-
Hakinai?
Hakinai is the grandfather.
Is the grandfather, and they're calling Hananiah's daughter. They're calling her the daughter of Hakinai. Why?
Because he was gone for so long.
Yeah, because Hakinai, his father, grandfather, was raising her.
Right.
He was like her father, right? He's like her father. I mean, can you imagine how much that hurts? He's not saying daughter of Hananiah, it's daughter of Hakinai, because he's realizing by this, it's like a slap in the face when he realizes that they're calling her the daughter of his father, who basically raised him because he was in absentia. He was not there. So it's a real slap in his face that the people in the town don't even know who her father is, or if her father is even alive. They just assume that the grandfather is the father because that's the one who's raising her. And he doesn't even know where they live. So but he realizes that this is who they're talking about because he recognizes the name Hakinai. So he goes and he follows her back home. And he enters the house, and what happens? His wife sees him at the door. She
dies.
Died.
She dies.
Yeah.
She dies. So this is a warning, never to surprise somebody. If you are in any doubt as to what the results of that surprise will be, because we talk about how great it is to have a surprise party and take pictures of people who are surprised at their surprise party. But how horrible it would be if somebody had a heart attack because they were so surprised because of this surprise party. This is based on, by the way, it's based on in the Torah, it says that it talks about Aaron and his sons, the priests, and it says, Al yavo b'chol eit ela kodesh, that Aaron and his sons were not supposed to come at any time into the Holy of Holies. They were supposed to come at certain specific times, and they were supposed to have on their garments that they were wearing as they came through the camp to the Holy of Holies. They were supposed to have bells attached to the bottom of their garments. It talks all about these little bells that were attached. Somebody apparently thought that they found one of these bells in an archaeological discovery, which would have been amazing because it was the only thing that we ever have really from the high priest in the temple times, in the temple days, a high priest with the bells on his things. Turns out there was a big special exhibit in the Israel Museum for this bell, and until somebody realized that it was a fake, somebody made it, and they took the exhibit down in a big hurry. But the idea was that when Aaron and his sons were the priests, the high priests, were coming into the Holy of Holies, they should have bells attached so that people would hear them coming, and nobody would turn and see the high priest and could have a heart attack. because it was such an awesome experience. So then nobody was supposed to be surprised by this appearance of the high priest. And here is a midrash that kind of talks about this man who went for 13 years, and he came in and surprised his wife, and her soul departed. And then at the end it says, some say that it returned. Why do you think they put that addendum at the end of this midrash? It's sort of a strange ending. His wife, her soul departed. Some say that it returned.
Maybe they wanted to imply she fainted and then recovered.
Why?
It seems pretty cold and cruel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably correct. That this was the original midrash says she died. I mean, that was the whole point of the midrash. You shouldn't surprise people. You should be careful before you surprise. You should be careful if you surprise people, because bad things can happen. You might think it's a pleasant surprise, but it may not be. You could cause great damage. But then somebody later said, this is a little too harsh. Let's allow the possibility that she fainted and she came back. Let's allow for that possibility.
Rabbi,
Yes.
she wrote to him and said, your daughter needs to get married, come home. So what was the huge surprise there?
Well, he had never responded to anything. He was away for 13 years.
Also, what does the story, what's the connection?
Yeah. Sorry?
Jacob said.
I missed that. What was the question? Wait.
So what's the connection between the story and the verse where Jacob says, now let me die?
Oh, they're just taking it very literally here, and they're saying that when Jacob saw Joseph, he said, now let me die. In other words, it was such a surprise to him. It was such an unexpected occurrence that he would ever see his son again, that basically he died when he saw his son. That's their sort of literal interpretation of now let me die. We might read it differently. We might read it and say, now I can die in peace. But they're reading it very literally. Now let me die.
But that phrase has a very different implication. When people say, now let me die, it's often because they're in such pain of a terminal illness. To say, now I can die in peace is a very different statement.
Right, but I think in this case, it's neither one or the other. What they're interpreting it very literally is in relation to this idea of Aaron not going in to the Holy of Holies without the bells, because the bells are supposed to let people know that the high priest is coming, so they not be surprised, because they can have health consequences if they see something that is so surprising. In this case, it was Jacob seeing his son Joseph, who he never thought he would see again. Or in the Midrash, it was this woman seeing her husband after 13 years. And he didn't tell her that he was coming, and nor did he warn her in any way that he was coming. She turned around, she saw him. It was like she died. It was too much of a surprise.
Well,
but all of that is interesting. But what is the point of the Midrash? The point is not that you can die when you're surprised. What is really the point of this Midrash? What is this Midrash trying to tell us?
Twice before you leave your wife for 13 years.
Yes.
Yeah, and
yes.
Communicate. I think a lot of it is about this lack of communication. So I'm doing this interpretation. Oh, his wife barely saw him. Well, that he barely saw her by not writing. and then her soul departed. Actually, her soul had been robbed from her because she was all alone and she had no communication from a husband.
Wonderful.
And some say that it returned is a way of letting the husband off the hook a little
Yeah,
time.
well, maybe, yeah. Or maybe it's a way of saying it's never too late. You can always make amends. But, you know, if you want to take this a little less literally, couldn't you say that this is directed towards scholars and says don't neglect your wife, but in our day, probably more appropriate would be people who are so consumed with their work, with their careers, that they neglect their families. And this is a slap in the face and saying, don't neglect your families, or your daughter will be known as so-and-so, and she will grow up not knowing her parent. If you let your career get in the way of your taking care of your family, of your being there for your family, and there will be terrible consequences to pay. You know, they go to the extreme, but I mean, for today's world, I think it's very potent that there are people whose whole lives are devoted to their careers, and they never experience or take part in the raising of their children. And there are terrible consequences to pay. And this Midrash is a wonderful one to make that point. Why? Because according to the rabbis who write these Midrashim, what is the most important thing that a man can do with his life? Study Torah. What could be more important than that? And they're saying, no, there are things that are more important than studying Torah. And if you neglect your children, that's even worse. It's not worth it. Why am I getting this mail? I'm trying to get rid of this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another week or two.
Rabbi,
Need another week or two.
there's also, I'm struck by the symmetry that this Midrash starts out with the suffering of the father when his family is torn apart and separated, and he doesn't know what's become of his son. And it ends, and then it centers on another family where the wife of Hananiah, or Hanai, or Hananiah, doesn't know what's really happened with her husband, and she suffers greatly. So it starts off that way and ends that way.
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble with my Zoom here. I don't know why.
Just a warning, it's 7:28 and we do have to end at 7:30.
Oh, okay. Let me give.
I have one question about the name Hakina. There are two forms, Hakinai, which would suggest first person possessive, and Hakina. Is there any significance to the difference?
I don't think there's a significance to the difference, but there is a very important significance to the name of Hananiah ben Hakinai. What's missing in that name, Hananiah ben Hakinai? That's in the other rabbis. That's in Shimon bar Yochai's name. Notice that he is not called rabbi. He is not called rabbi. He's been studying for 13 years with Rabbi Akiba, and yet he's not called rabbi. And I think it's significant that the Midrash calls him Hananiah instead of rabbi, because they are passing a judgment on his behavior towards his family, that he doesn't deserve to be called rabbi.
Rabbi Astor,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to go to Minyan.
Yes.
You next week, Bruce is giving us a talk about the Jewish calendar, which is very appropriate for Rosh Hashanah. But if you would be willing to finish your talk after the holidays, we will be very happy.
I would love to do that because we only got through 2 of these midrashim and we missed some of the, we didn't do the really good ones because
Thank you very much, Rabbi.